Well, today we begin the first week of our sermon series, Living the Good Life. Now, if I asked you this morning, what makes a good life, I bet we would get a lot of different responses. Perhaps for some of you, it would be living a good life is having a happy family, having a full family, having good connections with your family. Perhaps for others of us, we might say it's being comfortably financially, it's having our needs met, and perhaps even our greeds. Perhaps for some of us, we might say that living a good life is having a fit body, looking beautiful by cultural standards. Perhaps it would be saying being healthy and well and able to do all the things you want to do. Perhaps for some of us, we would say it's to know that I'm going to be able to enjoy retirement. I don't know what it is for you today, but whatever that thing is, that good life is, I invite you to consider, how would you define a good life? And then as you consider that throughout this series, I want us to think about how Jesus describes what a good life is, what it means to choose to live a good life, as was challenged to the Israelites in our earlier passage so beautifully read. What does it mean to live a good life? Jesus, as we find ourselves in Matthew chapter 5, is preaching what is the notoriously best sermon of all time by Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, this is probably the sermon that most people reference and know and are more familiar with, and it's quite lengthy. And Jesus, in this Sermon on the Mount, he begins with what they call as the Beatitudes. Now, I think it's fascinating that Jesus doesn't preach this sermon in a synagogue. Jesus doesn't preach this sermon inside of any buildings or near or by the temple. Jesus goes outside of the four walls to the people. He goes to perhaps those who may not have been welcomed in a synagogue, or those to whom might not have ever heard a message of hope or healing or truth. He goes out to the people, into the world where they're gathering, it says, and there he preaches this message to them. Perhaps, I imagine, Jews and Gentiles alike are gathered. And he preaches this beautiful sermon. And today we're just going to look at the Beatitudes. Some of you may know the Beatitudes, right? It's those who Jesus blesses those, or God blesses those who are poor in spirit. God blesses those who mourn. God blesses those who are humble. God blesses those who seek justice. But now, it's interesting because the word blessed that we hear here, blessed is those who mourn. Blessed are those who seek justice. We don't really use that word very often, do we? I mean, maybe if someone sneezes, you may say, God bless you. Perhaps at the end of a speech, you may hear someone say, God bless America. But often we don't hear this reference of blessed or God bless. It's kind of foreign to us. So as we dig into the message, I want us to consider something. Perhaps the word blessed could be better understood in our modern day ears as saying, favored are those who mourn. Beloved are those who seek justice. Loved are those who are low in spirit. Perhaps you could fill it in with that. Perhaps it's God walks with, and God is merciful to, and God is patient for, and God sides with the meek and the humble. Perhaps that is a better idea of what blessed means on our modern ears. So we come here today to the very first blessed. Let's explore this. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for Him, or some would say those who are poor in spirit. I couldn't help this week but to sort of be amazed by all of the coverage on the death of Senator John McCain. And I had to ask myself, why is this man so exalted in our culture and so glorified right now? Why are people mesmerized by him? And I couldn't help but consider his life. And the thing that I always hear when I hear of John McCain and think about, oftentimes, is his time that he spent as a prisoner in war for 5 years during Vietnam. And he makes this statement here that I think is quite fascinating in regards to describing his time when I believe he was lowest in spirit. He says, I was not allowed to see or talk or communicate with any of my fellow prisoners when I was in prison for 5 years. My room was a fairly decent size. I'd say it was about 10 by 10. The door was solid, there were no windows, and the only ventilation came from 2 small holes at the top of the ceiling. They are about 6 inches by 4 inches. The roof was tin, and it got hot as hell in there. The room was kind of dim night and day, but they always kept on a small light bulb so they could observe me. It was in that place for 2 years. Then they bounced me from pillar to post, kicking and laughing and scratching. After a few hours of that, ropes were put on me, and I sat that night, bound with ropes. Then I was taken to a small room, and for the next 4 days, I was beaten every 2 to 3 hours by different guards. My left arm was broken again, and my ribs were cracked. I remember when Senator McCain was running for president, and I asked, why couldn't he lift his arms past here? This seemed very bizarre to me that he didn't lift his arm like most presidents to do maybe the Kennedy wave. And somebody said, well, his arms were broken in war so many times that this is as far as he can lift his arms. A visible reminder, even after he was out of prison, that he had been low in spirit and in body. I couldn't help but think about this man who was confined to a prison cell that then found himself on the floor of the Senate as a maverick, fighting for the justice and equality for all. And even after 9/11, when all this was going on and extreme tactics were being taken against prisoners, he stood up and said, "This is wrong. We can't do this." A man who fought and who had opponents. I found it extremely ironic that for his funeral, he asked President Obama and George W. Bush to literally give his eulogy. Two opponents. People had beaten him. I mean, if I think about people to give my eulogy, it's going to be people who really respect me and adore me, and I know would say nothing but flowering good things about me. And as I watched President Obama and President Bush's speeches yesterday, I couldn't help but think, they said some good things, but boy, were they tough on him. But boy, was John McCain tough on himself, always willing to admit, I am an imperfect human being. I think that because he was so low in spirit, it taught him how to love his enemies. And I think more than that, it taught him not to have an enemy, but to only have opponents. People who he differed with, but to love and respect them nonetheless. I think because of how low in spirit he was, he realized his humanity, but the humanity of those around him. It did something for him. I think he saw a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven. And because of John McCain, I think the ways in which he lived his life, we saw a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven through him. A man who was poor in spirit, but because of it, had come to know God in a new way. Blessed, church, are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who know more of what they don't believe than what they do believe. Blessed are they who doubt, and blessed are those to whom they feel that they have nothing to offer. Blessed are they whom nothing seems to ever work out. Blessed is the preschooler who cuts in line and gets scolded. Blessed are the sick. Blessed are those who live in a nursing home after wishing for so long this would not be so. Blessed, church, are the poor in spirit, for you have had to learn to depend on God. You have seen God. You are of heaven, and Jesus blesses you. Jesus goes on to name, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I can remember when I worked at Northwestern Memorial Hospital doing a residency for chaplaincy there. And one late evening, early on in my residency, I got awakened in the middle of the night, and I threw my chaplaincy clothes on quickly and rushed off to the waiting room where I was being paged to. And as the doors flew open, there stood a woman with long flowing white hair and tears bellowing down her face, alone in this dark waiting room in the middle of the night. I made myself known to her as the chaplain, and she immediately ran across the room, threw her arms around me, and began to just weep. After holding her for a little while, I invited her to sit down, and she began to tell me why she was there. She said her husband and her had come to the hospital because he was having some heart pain, and she said within a matter of minutes, she said they lost him. How could this have happened? Why did this happen? And she kept asking me, how? And I did not have any medical or spiritual answer for her, but to just sit and go, I don't know. She would juxtapose back between telling me stories and crying and weeping. And then after about an hour, one of her relatives showed up, and they began to sit there and talk with her and reminisce. And then after another hour, she just looked up at me after having been there for 2 hours with her and said, is it okay that I'm a Wiccan? And I said, what? What do you mean, is it okay that you're a Wiccan? She said, is it okay with you that I'm a Wiccan? Like, does it bother you? Are you okay being here with me even knowing that I'm a Wiccan? And I said, now, what do you mean a Wiccan? And she said, well, I'm a witch. I practice witchcraft. And I said, Well, it doesn't bother me one bit. I said, you're a human who's mourning and lost their husband, and I'm a human who's here to love you and be with you in the midst of it. She began to cry, and she said, well, my husband who passed away, his brother and sister, they are diehard Christians. And I thought, what's a diehard Christian? But I didn't inquire any further. It wasn't about me. It was about her. And I said, okay, and she said, well, they're such diehard Christians that they're unwilling to even talk to me at family functions. They don't even acknowledge that I exist because I'm a Wiccan. And she said, now I have to call them and tell them that their brother's passed, and I don't even know if they're going to answer the phone. And I said, well, I do not care that you're a Wiccan. I believe in a Jesus that would talk with anyone and would comfort anyone when they're mourning. And she said, well, I've never met a Christian like that before. And I said, well, hi, my name is Josh. And she laughed, and we had this moment just like you did. And it was healing. And I walked away in that moment, and I went, whether she believes in the God that I worship or not, my God had just comforted her through me. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are they for whom unforeseen death beseeched their soul. Blessed are they who have buried loved ones, and mourning seems to just never end. Blessed are they who have loved enough to know what loss feels like. Blessed are the parents of the miscarried. Blessed are those who've lost loved ones to violence or war. Blessed are they who can't fall apart because they have to keep it all together for everyone else. Blessed are those to whom have desired to have a fine family, but they just find themselves without. Blessed are those who still aren't over it yet. Blessed are they who laugh again when for so long they just thought they never would. Blessed is the widow or widower who still misses their spouse. Blessed are those who mourn, for Jesus suffers with you. You are of heaven, and may Jesus send people to comfort you. Jesus continues on in his Beatitudes, and he says, blessed then are also the meek, or the humble. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to do the wedding of my college roommate. He met this girl, and within a matter of 6 months, they were engaged, and within a year, they were tying the knot with me in California. But before I could get to California, I had to load up on a plane from Chicago, and before I could get on the plane, of course, as what usually happens, there were mechanical issues. So there was a delay, and we're sitting there waiting. I'm hoping I'm going to get there. I was getting there a day early just in case, so I wasn't too worried. But as we loaded onto the plane, people began to take their seats, and in front of me there was this little 8 or 9-year-old boy sitting all by himself next to some person he didn't know, and I could tell he was very nervous. And then this father came over and said, excuse me, sir, can I switch seats with you so I can sit next to my son? And the man agreed, and so the son and the father began to sit next to each other, and I could listen in on their conversation because the engines hadn't quite started yet. And as I could hear them talking, the little boy began to say, Dad, there were mechanical issues. Do you know what those mechanical issues were? And the dad said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, I watched this movie this one time, and these people, they went down in this plane, and almost all of them died, but there were a few survivors, and I'm sitting there going, please make this kid stop. He's talking a million miles an hour, just like I was a moment ago. And he's anxious and he's nervous. And then the father, as the plane begins to take off and pick up speed, and you know that feeling in the pit of your belly, the son just becomes undone. So the father undoes his seatbelt, which you're not supposed to, and he begins to cradle his son in his arms. He pushes his head into his chest, and he throws his arms around him like a big bear hug. And I hear him get down into his son's ear, and he says, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Daddy's here. And my first reaction was, don't lie to that kid. You don't know that. We just have mechanical issues. You don't know it's going to be okay. But then I began to realize he wasn't telling the kid that there was going to be a good life and everything was going to be perfect and flawless and without pain or suffering. He didn't know that. He couldn't promise it, but he was promising this. I'm going to be here. No matter what happens, I'm right here. We're doing this together. And that comforted the child. This kid, to me, is the epitome of humble and meek, right? Because he's completely dependent upon his father. He had no choice. He had to get on this plane. He has to do what his dad tells him to do. He's vulnerable, and he's completely dependent to trust on his dad. This is what it means for there to be humility and to be meek. It's to be in this position of complete trust that, God, I don't know why, I don't know how, but I trust that you are with me in the journey and that we're going to get through this, even if it doesn't feel like a good life sometimes. Blessed, church, are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those to whom no one else notices. The kid who sits alone at the middle school lunch table, the laundry guy at the hospital, the sex worker, and the night shift street sweeper. Blessed is the human on the street who longs for someone to just look into their eyes and to see their humanity. Blessed are those who seek peace instead of war, bridges instead of borders. Blessed are those to whom people say should be seen but not heard, children. Blessed are the children to whom never won a trophy. And blessed are those parents who never told their children they were proud, and the child who longs to hear it. Blessed are the forgotten. Blessed are the closeted. Blessed are the unemployed, the unimpressive, the unrepresented. Blessed are the meek, for they share a joy that is free of pride and ambition. You are of heaven, and Jesus blesses you. Jesus finally wraps up with, we're not going to go through all the Beatitudes, but this final one I would like to share is he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. One of the things I love about Kingswood the most is that we're a church that for those whose bellies need filling, we fill. Those to whom need a pillow and a bed, we provide. Those to whom need clothing and needs and goods for their homes, we give. But most of all, I think one of the things that's so unique about our church is the immigration clinic that we do once a month. This is a group of people who often English is not their first language or any language at all for them. And they're here seeking justice, seeking a better life, seeking a different way. And we as a church in many ways come alongside of them once a month, and we have folks who volunteer here as well as attorneys that we open our space to, that they come and we provide legal counsel to them, because God knows our legal system is difficult to navigate if you speak English and you're American, let alone if you're not even from here. And we provide the needs for those who are seeking this out, who are seeking a better life for themselves. A different way needs to be met, in many ways even survival for some of them. And I think what I love about that is this beautiful picture that I think that example encompasses all of that. Many who come feel very poor in spirit. Many who come, they're mourning perhaps even the separation from a family member or a loved one or a child. Many who come are meek and humble and totally vulnerable to us caring for their needs because they have no other advocate. And many who come are just seeking justice. And to me, that's the beautiful thing about being a part of this church, is that we're a church that desires to believe that the world can be better than what it is. We're a church that believes that what is can be different, that the kingdom can come here and now, and we can see it living among us, that people can be blessed now and just not in the life to come, but that they can inherit the kingdom and the beauty of all that is available here and now as we live out to Jesus' principles and we bless people as we are blessed. So as we bring a close to the message today, I want to challenge us in this. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are the wrongly accused and the ones who never can catch a break, the ones to whom life is hard, for those to whom Jesus chose to surround himself with. Blessed are those who work for justice and equality. Blessed are those without documentation, a pillow, or their child. Blessed are the ones without lobbyists. Blessed are the orphans, the foster kids, the trophy kids, and the differently abled children. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they know there has to be more than what is. Church, I believe that we are loved and beloved by God. Those of us who are low in spirit, those of us who are mourning, those of us who are humble, those of us who are seeking justice, I remind you this morning, you are blessed to be a blessing. You are loved to love. You, church, are beloved and blessed. Amen and amen. Will you stand with me? Receive this benediction as you go into the world. You are blessed. You are loved. You are favored. You are cherished sons and daughters of God. God has richly blessed you to praise that God, but also to give back. So as you have been blessed and consider how good your life is, may you consider how you may be able to make others' lives good, and may you bless them. May you love them just as you have been loved and you have been blessed. Go in peace and know the Lord.
Amen.
Amen.